So, as we've said before, Reform are, well, initially having their first couple of council meetings. And so far, shall we say, it's been all quiet a bit on the Western Front. A lot of people, including myself, did expect there to be a lot more, shall we say, fireworks, especially down in Cornwall, where we saw Reform denied taking control of the Cornwall County Council thanks to an alliance between the Lib Dems and the Independents, although that still seems to be in a somewhat of a bit of a Mexican standoff, according to some of the things I have seen down there. Maybe we'll see what happens. However, there was a vote that took place, and the, well, Reform, shall we say, didn't even vote. No, they abstained in some cases. Not only that, it's also come out down there that two of the councillors don't even live in the wards that they represent. In fact, they live miles away from the wards that they represent. So how on earth are they going to be able to represent those wards where they don't even live anywhere close to it? Cornwall's not exactly, a small place to, nip across and check it out. Ultimately, I highly suspect we'll probably see a lot of maybe very angry residents, maybe down in Cornwall, complaining about those councillors. However, we go, of course, from Cornwall over to Warwickshire, where a very interesting thing has happened. And this is something that I did initially sort of warn about. And it's how much would the Tories be willing to back Reform in some of these areas where maybe they have a majority but not enough to take control. And Warwickshire County Council, by the looks of it, is one of those areas where the Tories, according to this, have very much so reluctantly backed the Reform UK group on the proviso that they get, of course, some nice plum positions on, certain, shall we say, committees here and there. So we're going to have a look at what's going on here in this case. But also, and I want to remind you, watch out for some of these councils, because it is very likely, and I have surprised we have not seen this yet, but maybe we will in the next coming weeks or so. Watch for any Tories that suddenly decide to go, well, I'm a Reform councillor now. And watch out for the Independents as well doing that too, because that's where some of them have come from in the past. So watch out for those swappings happening. And then you have every right to, of course, challenge those councillors and say, if you are so sure that you would have won as a Reform person, you should restand for a by-election. They don't have to, of course, but it annoys me that they can just get away and do that, and even do this back and forth several times should they wish to do so. Something that highly annoys me about that in politics, but that's my own gripe for another time. Anyway, back, of course, on to Warwickshire County Council, shall we say. So, there we go. So this actually comes from the Stratford-upon-Avon Herald, and they've been following this as well. So their title for this is "The Beaten Tories Now Voting for the Absentee Reform Leader, Clueless New Councillors, and Angry Swipes from the Greens Mark the First Warwickshire County Council AGM." And oh boy, if you saw Graham's covering of the first Durham Council, they have no idea. They have no idea what's going on. But then, bearing in mind, I suspect most people watching that probably don't either. That's because these council proceedings have all sorts of rules, order, procedure that people basically just don't know or understand because it's so arcane to them and they have had no previous experience watching anything like that. And that is fine. Not a lot of people do. It takes time to get used to it. But you'd think if you were going to be standing for a council, you would standing for that council position, you would actually, look up that stuff, be prepared for that eventuality. Should you win, that you would at least have an idea of what you were doing in that regard. But anyway, let's get on to this. So the proceedings were mostly civil at the Warwickshire County Council AGM on the 16th of May, when the newly elected councillors now met in the very hallowed chamber at the Shire Hall in Warwick. In the first such meeting now of the full council since the local elections, which saw a change now from the hue of blue to cyan, as Reform now nabbed 22 seats against the Tories' lowly 9. So, as you can see here, big change on that. But the Farage-fueled tidal wave now obliterated the previously tally of the Tories' 42 seats, and Izzy Seacombe now swiveled down the plug hole after a 12-year reign as leader. Since then, the Herald has now been doing its best primary school arithmetic to actually work out to see if the other parties could club together all their apples to now scupper Reform taking the leadership, as they only have 22 of the 57 seats, and therefore don't have enough to apply for the majority rule. They did, of course, have 23, but one of their apples was, of course, eaten by Councillor Luke Shinger, who, of course, won as Reform candidate, but then had to become an independent now because of his job, which no one, possibly not even Luke himself, seems to know the details of. Which, again, I find highly funny, of the fact that this guy stood as a Reform councillor and then won as a Reform councillor and then went, oh, well, I'm now going to have to become an independent because of my job. What's your job? Why do you have to become an independent? Don't know. Maybe because he saw how toxic that might be, potentially could be, and decided to maybe jump ship on that. As we've seen over the past couple of weeks, a couple of other similar Reform candidates jumping ship, realizing, oh dear, yeah, this is all a bit toxic. Maybe I don't want to be, associated or tarred with that brush. Anyway, at least in theory, a combination of the other parties, of the Lib Dems with 14, the Greens with 7, and Labour with 3, could have united now to rule the orchard. But the thirst now for power proved now irresistible for the Tories, who largely chose to quietly now support Reform in what you might call a playground swapsies deal that sees the Tories now sweetened with a couple of top jobs to be announced. And that's where we'll see if things like this and these deals come to pass. Will these Tories work all the time with Reform? Will they actually back Reform properly? Or will they just be there, get the top jobs, and then when things start to go wrong, blame the Reform candidates? After all, you've got to remember, Reform ran an entire campaign where they were like, we're better than the two other parties. It's us. We'll show them how. We'll show them how it's all done, even though we've had absolutely zero political experience at all in any of these roles or have any policies to give to people. But don't worry, we'll be better. Yeah, I very much doubt it, considering, as we'll be covering probably in our next video, they've just got rid of a flooding prevention unit in one of the local councils in an area that has quite a lot of flooding. Gee, what a smart idea that sounds like. Anyway, the council CEO, Monica Fogarty, the doyen now of the correct procedure, who sits, of course, at the top table with the chair, was very keen and very busy with a lot of the now many newcomers who didn't have a single Scooby-Doo what was going on, with much rustling of papers, blank looks, and elbow nudging going on. Doesn't surprise me in the least for that. Although it must be said that the new chair, Edwin Harris, seems to have been a bit of at least gravitas to him, he at least promised to keep everything dignified and respectful going forward. With the way the new chair and leaders are now elected is done, of course, by roll call, Monica says your name and you must now bellow forth your chosen nominee. With the exception, of course, Councillor Chris Mills, who abstained from each of the Tory councillors, seem now to offer their votes as though through now gritted teeth, as they backed Reform Councillor Harris and Howard as chair and the leader, respectively. A palpable sense of shame seemed to now pall over the once proud Blues as they now utter their names of their former rivals. It was like when anyone in Harry Potter has to say Lord Voldemort's name. I do not. That does not surprise me. At least it does not surprise me at all, because the biggest rivalry going on is between those two parties, and it kind of shocks me that they've given in on this. That there has been this, oh, fine, we'll let them in through gritted teeth, but at least we get a couple of nice top jobs. But anyway, and of course, speaking of one who wasn't there, new leader Rob Howard was appointed on his holidays and couldn't make the meeting. Why? Why on earth? Why on earth would, again, you stand for leadership, get elected, and then go on holiday in easily what would be one of the most important periods of you getting this new job? Anyway, it continues. To be fair, of course, it was all rather a dull meeting with very little political argy-bargy. So who wouldn't be rather sipping a pina colada somewhere else cheerier? Again, can't agree with them on that, but it does show you probably the level of political care you're going to get from these Reform councillors in these areas. After all, taking after their leader, Nigel Farage, on that one. Howard's absence did, of course, at least give Councillor Will Roberts of the Greens a chance to at least take a small swipe during the leadership vote. He worried that, quote, today we're being asked by Reform to vote for a leader who is not here, an absentee group leader with absentee policies. Again, he's not wrong in saying that whatsoever. Staffordshire's, of course, Reform councillors James Crocker previously promised the Herald that the party would, of course, liven up some now of these dull council meetings, so we're at least looking forward to many more custard pies coming out in due course. We'll see. We'll see if that happens. We'll see if some of these council meetings get heated later on down the lines, but as always is the case, sooner or later, these guys are going to end up running into the realities of what they've walked into. And when they try and push some of these policies, it's not going to end well for them. It's not going to end well for them at all. But anyway, that's Warwickshire County Council for you. If you're from Warwickshire, what do you think? And of course, as always, if you are a councillor on one of these councils that we mentioned and you want to talk about all the stuff that's going on with these Reform, lunatics, by all means, please do feel to get in contact with me. I will gladly give you a platform to tell people what on earth is going on here. Because quite frankly, it needs to be said in a very loud way that these Reform people are absolute lunatics and have zero idea what they're doing. And if you think they are this bad at running your local council, how on earth are they going to cope if they somehow manage to gain a majority at potentially the next general election? But anyway, so as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, we'll see you all next time.